Disney's Marvel Studios, since Endgame in 2019, has languished under the yoke of its own poor decision-making and, frankly, bad management. For the last several years here on Valiant Renegade, we've examined all of the movies that have come out since Phases 4 and 5 began shortly after the pandemic. And one of the things that has been consistent is the losses that have mounted since then. And one movie in particular maybe gave Marvel some hope. That was Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. But now, thanks to some intrepid reporting by Forbes magazine's own Caroline Reid, we now know that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness also lost money. That means that every single film that Disney distributed for Marvel's cinematic universe was a flop at the box office. Renegade Online. Because our friend Caroline Reid out there has once again done it. She has been tracking the financial returns filed in the UK for a lot of these Disney productions. Disney reveals that Doctor Strange 2 cost more to make than Avengers Age of Ultron. I'll repeat that. Disney reveals through their tax documents that Doctor Strange 2 cost more to make than Age of Ultron. I talked about this a few days ago. I posted something on Twitter saying, kind of told y'all so. This is where it is. But let's get down to the nitty-gritty of it. According to our friend Caroline Reid's research here on Forbes magazine, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Let me find the figure. There it is right there at the top paragraph. Silly me. Disney has revealed the cost of the 2022 superhero movie Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness surged to a staggering $400 and let's call it $15 million, making it one of the most expensive installments in the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, even surpassing the team-up flick Avengers Age of Ultron. That is bonkers. Now, I realize that those two films were about, 8 years apart? I think the first Avengers film was 2012. Age of Ultron was like 2-3 years later, maybe 2014, 15. I got to go back and look it up. Pardon me for not remembering that. The total budget was buried in filings released earlier this week. This article was from about 7-8 days ago, which show that Avengers Age of Ultron cost 6.4 less to make than Multiverse of Madness, but generated 3 times more profit based on the box office reported for the movies. And that's true. Think about Age of Ultron for a minute. Think of the scale in that movie. You had everybody. You had Robert Downey Jr., you had Chris Evans, you had Chris Hemsworth, you had the entire Avengers team. I want you to think about the amount of money that had to have been paid out to have that huge headline cast, because by that point, this wasn't the first Avengers film. We're now into the second Avengers film. Most of these guys were on their second contracts, I would bet you, the renewals, where the rates would have been much higher. In Doctor Strange, what did we really have? I mean, we had Benedict Cumberbatch, which is great, and you had a little bit of Spider-Man in there, too, in the beginning, right? It's kind of that crossover from Spider-Man No Way Home, and that's what brought it in. But there wasn't a whole lot else. There wasn't like this giant, massive... This was just bad production management. This was straight up bad production management on the part of Disney. Remember, we talked about Victoria Alonso, who was at Marvel Studios, who at one point was in charge of post-production and production. Like, they had this weird title for her, and of course, she got thrown under the bus to save Kevin Feige's ass. That's what that was all about. She was a complete piece of garbage, but she was thrown under the bus to save Kevin Feige. Feige wasn't really disciplined for it, but ultimately, as the studio head, he was the one responsible for this complete mismanagement. This was the Feige method, right? Storyboard everything. Shoot everything. Shoot 2-3 different movies. Shoot 6 different endings. And then put everything in front of a test audience at the end of the day and see what they liked the best. Apparently, none of it worked. But that drives the production budget up substantially when you do that. So what you have here is a movie that cost $415 million for this, which is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. And I told you guys at the time when this happened, I told you guys that I don't know if this movie really made a lot of money. It might have broken even. It might have broken even or made a little bit of money, but I was incredibly skeptical as to whether or not this movie absolutely turned a good profit. And there were a lot of people out there that said, oh, Doctor Strange made so much money. It made a lot of profit. And I'm like, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. Let me explain. Check this out. I told you guys this almost 2 years ago. Okay? Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness hauled in $952 million globally. Of that, I ran the calculations. And based on the domestic versus international split, and of course, this was before Disney made it back into China. So there's no China in that international. This is straight, regular international haul. Okay? No 25% takedowns from China here. Basically, Disney took home about $450 to $460 million of that 952. The cost, according to Disney, as researched by our friend Caroline Reid from Forbes magazine, was $415. That means at best, they might have walked out of there with about $40 to $45 million in profit. Except for the fact that, of course, that $415 million is strictly production. It's not marketing. What do you think they spent on marketing? Let me remind folks out there of what Sony Pictures spent just 5 months before for Spider-Man No Way Home to market the film. The estimated marketing spend, global marketing P&A, prints and ads, for Spider-Man No Way Home was somewhere in the vicinity, according to Deadline Magazine's panel of experts and research, of $220 million. I'll say it again. The marketing for Spider-Man No Way Home was somewhere north of $200 million. Remember what we talked about 2 years ago with this movie? Disney was going all in on this because they saw what happened with Spider-Man No Way Home. They had every incentive to ride that wave into Doctor Strange 2, which was the intention from the outset. Disney probably overspent on the marketing for this as well. I'm not saying that they spent 200 some odd million on this, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if they went north of 150. But let's just say they did 150, which was about average fare for the Marvel films of that era. And that means that they might have recovered about $40 to $50 million of that marketing spend from the box office, and the other $100 million was lost. In other words, according to actual tax filings, or I should say financial returns with the UK to obtain the UK film tax credits, okay, they may not have made it. Now, of course, they did get some film tax credits which would have netted that $410 million back down, right? So if we go back to the article, how much did the film tax credits actually help? Because I did not expect that gross spend of $410 to be that insane. Just as a comparison here, total costs of MCU movies. Now, people have had questions on this. Let me explain something here before we go to the tax credit, because this was first in the order here for the article. The Marvels, $277.3 million. There's a lot of people out there quoting this as the film's production budget from a lot of different places, like even the numbers have updated their figures. I want to stress that number is incomplete. That is not the final cost. That's not the final spend. That is the figure. $277 million for the Marvels is what we have as of now. There are probably still at least one, if not two more financial filings that we will see over the next 12 to 18 months in the UK for this film. That $277 million is going to explode. explode. It's going to go way over 300, and it may actually approach 400 million. We're going to be talking about a production budget or an expenditure for that movie that is going to approach what we're seeing from Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Okay, so everybody key in on that. So in contrast, 2015 Age of Ultron was the only movie made by Assembled Productions 2, which is the code name for the business entity for, in this case, Avengers 2. It cost $388.4 million. It generated $383 million of profit. Again, that was exclusive of taking down marketing costs, so it was probably lower than that. But again, as I remind folks, Caroline Reid is reporting on actual data that she has access to. She's not deliberately trying to obfuscate by not having marketing costs in there. She's simply reporting data on hand. And she always stipulates in these articles that this is simply for production and would not include what the distribution chain spent to market a film. So always remember that when you read these kind of things. As the chart below shows, this yielded total cost of $415 million for Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, but then came a $64.3 million film tax credit, okay? Film tax credits in the UK, again, up to 25% of eligible expenses. Not every dollar of that $415 million is an eligible expense, and not every one of those eligible expenses would qualify up to the full 25%. So when people say, oh, it's $400 million, well, they should get back $100 million in film tax credits. That's 25%. Well, it would be if every single thing they spent in that budget was eligible. It's not. It never is. Things like the writer's salary, the directors, the producers, the principal actors, the above-the-line people, you're not getting film tax credits for Benedict Cumberbatch's salary. Okay? You're not getting film tax credits for what you paid Sam Raimi to direct this thing. They're not getting film tax credits on the fee that Feige gets paid under the PGA for his executive producer credit in the front. No, you don't get tax credits for that. Eligible expenses in the UK. So that basically brought the net cost down to, let's call it, around $355 or so million, or $350 million in that case. 350. You still put another 150 on top of that for marketing. This movie, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and let me switch back over here. Let's make this very clear, because we now have definitive information, unassailable definitive information based on financial returns filed by the Walt Disney Company itself. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness needed to break $1 billion, at least $1 billion at the box office. It needed at least $500 million in revenue net from the box office to break even. It took home, as I said, based on this, between 450 and 460. We can now definitively say that based on its box office run, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness lost at least somewhere to the tune of $50 million. Make sure you're subscribed to Valiant Renegade and join us every Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern for the live show.